So tell me a bit about yourself.
My name's Paula Peters. I've been a disability rights activist from the age of 8. I'm 53 in a couple of weeks. How did I get involved in campaigning? I've got one of my disabilities is called hypermobility syndrome, and it's on the spectrum of NLOS. So I dislocate very easily and everything like that, and can cause damage when the joints go back in. And at the time, I was prescribed hydrotherapy. So you strengthen your muscles and joints in a hydrotherapy pool. So I learned to swim in a hydrotherapy pool in my local hospital. I had a year's hydrotherapy then. Now in the NHS, it's practically impossible to get hydrotherapy. And when I finished my treatment, I heard that the local hospital was going to close our hydrotherapy pool and not replace it. I joined the campaign to fight for a new hydrotherapy unit. And so we had to raise over £600,000 for a new hydrotherapy unit. And a long campaign in the community. And then, we managed to get a new hydrotherapy bill, and it's treated over 1 million people who needed hydrotherapy in southeast London. Sadly, today the hydrotherapy pool isn't open. We're having to fight to get that reopened. It really does help an awful lot of people. And then from there, my mental health deteriorated in my early 20s. I was hospitalised in a psychiatric inpatient unit, which are horrible places where you're injected against your will and your rights are taken from you. What I saw in an inpatient unit absolutely terrified me. And I wanted to do something about the psychiatric abuse and also Big Pharma numbing us up on really horrendous antipsychotic medication. So I joined the mental health survivor movement. And then flash forward to 2000 when we heard there was going to be an upcoming election. And then obviously Labour in 2008 had introduced the work capability assessment and employment and support allowance. Excuse me. And then people on legacy benefits were going to be, incapacity benefit were going to be reassessed at a later date. One of my friends had already taken their own lives back in 2009, and that had a horrendous impact on me. And then when we had the coalition government, or the Condems, as we need to remember them as, which was the Conservatives and the Lib Dems, when they had their emergency budget in 2010, and they were going to take over 18 billion off of the welfare state and 8 billion off of social care, and everyone on incapacity was going to be reassessed for employment and support allowance. My friend went through a work capability assessment in the December, and she was found fit for work, and she took her own life 2 weeks before Christmas. That put me in hospital, to be honest with you. And then the fear of the work capability assessment and the punitive measures that it is, I needed to learn everything I could about it. I found Benefits and Work, which are a really good site, and recommend Benefits and Work to disabled people. They've got really good guides, actually. But when I was in hospital, I saw an awful lot of people in mental distress getting employment and support allowance questionnaires to fill in when they were in hospital, and seriously distressed, not able to cope with any of that. And of course, there is if you don't fill this form out, your entitlements stop and everything like that. So I come out of hospital learning as much as I could about the work capability assessment and how I could help other people. And then I joined Facebook early in 2012. I wasn't a big fan of Facebook at the time. I come across this group called Disabled People Against Cuts, and their campaign against the work capability assessment, and the assessors at the time, which was Atos Healthcare. They were running a campaign called Atos Kill. And after losing 2 of my friends to the work capability assessment, one under a Labour government, one under a Condem government, I wanted in. So that's how I joined DPAC. I joined DPAC in 2012. and I got elected to the national steering group of DPAC in 2014. And then I'm also a trade unionist. I joined Unite as Unite community member back in 2013. So I'm now chair of my branch, Bromley and Croydon, because I live in Bromley. And I'm also a member of the local trades council in Bromley. And I'm chair of London and Eastern Unite Community Campaign Forum. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on really. So
Yeah.
that's how I got involved.
Great, that was like a good informative answer to that question. And as you were saying then, now you got involved with disabled people against cuts, and what has the benefits of finding that community, and what, for any disabled people who might not have, what is the benefits of finding groups like this, and how has it really helped you to have that collective activism rather than in terms of your own personal issues, rather than just fighting it by yourself?
For those people who haven't heard of Disabled People Against Cuts, DPAC, as we're better known as, set up on the 3rd of October 2010, back in Birmingham, outside the Conservative Party conference. And our co-founder, Linda Burnip, and she co-founded DPAC, launched a march called Disabled People's Protest, and that is the DPAC's Twitter handle. And over 3,000 disabled people and allies marched to the Tory party conference to raise concerns about welfare reforms and social care cuts, the proposed closure of the Independent Living Fund and everything like that. What's so important about DPAC is we all bring different skill sets to campaigning to DPAC, and to support, we campaign around the social model of disability, which is really important. But to be honest with you, groups like DPAC are massively important in amplifying disabled people's voices, getting the impact of austerity out into the wider narrative. But all DPAC are also incredibly good at showing solidarity to other campaigns, because at the end of the day, disabled people are disabled workers. We're mothers, family members, we use social care, we use local services, we use public transport. So it's important to join the dots and join all the fights together, and all of the cuts in every area of our life impacts on disabled people. So that's why it's called Disabled People Against Cuts. It's not against one cut, it's against all of them, and which is why it's important that we've set up. But yeah, what it's done is given disabled people a voice. There are many campaign groups for disabled people out there, but I think what's also important about DPAC is we don't take money from government, so therefore we're not gagged in what we say and how we say it. And our mantra is rights, not charity. We believe in fully inclusive rights. We do not believe in the charity model. And if you look back on the disability movement's history, when you've got piss on pity and everything, when you saw what Direct Action Network did in the 80s and 90s when they stormed the telethon and disabled people should be pitied and saw us as pity objects and everything like that, and we're not. I think it's really important to stress this. And what I love about DPAC is we all bring something to the group. And like I say, you can be a disabled artist, and we use art in the way we protest. People can do research, speak to the media, plan direct action and everything like that. And lobby MPs, councillors, like research papers and everything. We all bring different things to it. And to be honest with you, since finding DPAC in 2012, in many ways, and I think you asked many DPAC activists this, we found a way to channel our anger into campaigning, and for many of us, it's kept us alive.
And we was talking then about that storm off the telephone during the 1980s, but as you said, you've been involved in activism long before you were involved in DPAC and Unite. So can you tell me more about what were the other things when you started activism before you got involved with it? What are the other moments of progressions, the other problems that you could see from when you were growing up? What were the kind of things you were witnessing from the disability rights movement then?
To be honest with you, I think personally for me, because I had a disability as a child and I was horrendously bullied at school because of it and treated differently, not only by my classmates, but by my teachers as well. So it felt like I was marginalised in the education system, that I wasn't given the support I needed because I couldn't do everything that my classmates could do on the sports field and things like that. And I had horrendous bullying at school, and there wasn't the mental health support then to get support, to be honest with you. And I think more needs to be done in schools to educate children on disability acceptance. I think, and that's important to tie in the last 14 years with hate crime, because we've seen in the rhetoric in the media the dreadful scrounger rhetoric and work shy, which isn't a new rhetoric, by the way. It goes back decades and decades around the world where different governments and everything, you look at Nazi Germany and the history there, and they used that very dreadful rhetoric against disabled people there. I wasn't involved with the disabled people's movement when I was a child, but personally, I could see the impact things were having at school. Sometimes the fight to get treatment in the NHS, all of that had an impact on me. And growing up as a teenager in the 80s and under a Thatcher government, the impact of job cuts and everything, which impacted on my family personally, and knowing what it was like to go hungry as well and going without food. And I think that spurred my quest to fight back against injustice and poverty, really. I know what it was like to go hungry. I know what it was like to be cold at home. I also know what it was like to be marginalised by society because I had a disability. And that is something that fueled me to do something about it and try and make the world a better place for equality and social justice for disabled people, really. Until I got involved with the mental health survivor movement, I was doing an awful lot of community campaigning with different groups more than I was with the disabled people's movement. I wasn't involved with Dan in the 80s or 90s or anything like that.
Yeah. And I suppose that back in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was less of that collective activism in terms of getting them widespread across the country, and for many disabled individuals to actually know about this widespread, not just in like certain
I,
large areas where the greater populace and the
I,
disabled people,
I
yes,
think to be,
contributing point.
I think to be honest with you, the Direct Action Network did an awful lot to bring sharp focus to the issues around lack of accessible transport, and it's because of Dan that we've got ramps on buses and things like that. When they were handcuffing themselves to buses and gluing themselves on the underground and everything like that, they really put disabled people's rights front and centre. And I think we should never forget the fight before that with Paul Hunt and the the fight for independent living and to stop us being segregated into care homes and fully included in society with the right support. And I think the fight for independent living, and it's got to be said, none of the political parties have spoken about it today, but we've got a hell of a fight to get the right to independent living enshrined in UK law. And that's really important for disabled people going forwards with the new government. We've really got to push whoever gets elected tomorrow morning. We've got to push them on that. But yeah, I was on my own in the community, but from personal experiences, it has shaped the activist I've become today, definitely.
Yeah, and I guess would you say, as you said, like when you were young, you were hospitalized with your mental health, and I guess from having physical disabilities where like you were bullied, marginalized, and like financially suffered in the way like of growing up in through poverty, would you say that it's something that your experiences because of your physical disabilities led to that kind of at the time of lacking that support in or like lack with that state of ableism rather growing up, would you say that's something that you like that judgment on your physical disabilities led to that impact negative impact on your mental?
To a degree, But when I was at work, I was in a job that was very high pressure, and because I was a civil servant, and I was under an awful lot of pressure, which impacted on my mental health. And I think employers need to do an awful lot more to support disabled people in the workplace. In many jobs today, you can't have a mental health condition, you can't talk about your mental health. And I couldn't, in the line of work that I was working in, and what I was doing and what I was seeing at the age of 19 had a horrendous impact on my mental health. I had a huge breakdown at my desk. And because of the breakdown I had at my desk in my workplace, I lost my job because of it, because my place of work then saw me as a liability, because then I was hospitalised in a psychiatric unit. So to a degree, yes, depression started with me when I was a child, because I was horrendously bullied at school because of my physical disabilities and I was treated differently. But my mental health further decreased because of what was happening to me at work and the lack of support I was getting in my workplace. And I think one of the government narratives we need to push back on: work is not a health outcome for everybody. Work can actually make work, as it's been shown in the last 20, 30 years, with the increase of mental health in the workplace and people seriously become quite ill with it. Work is not always a health outcome. Work can actually make you quite sick. And in my case, work actually caused me, I had an awful lot of issues going on aside of work, but work actually drove me over the edge to a breakdown, definitely. And
And
I got no support from my
yeah.
human resources, but I was threatened by them not to talk about my experiences at work or anything. So it was very difficult when I did get to see a psychiatrist and a doctor. I couldn't talk about what was happening in the workplace because I got threats by my employer.
And so from like your like experience of ever it be from work to when you was hospitalized, what are the, like obviously you list some of the stuff that went wrong, but what are the things that you saw from like workplaces and that mental health hospitals that you saw was wrong, and that what are the things that could be learned for change, and what are the things that you could see that needs to be improved, and what action can be done even many years on from like the failures of, as I said, your HR department to the stuff that caused your mental health breakdown and hospitalisation.
There is an awful lot wrong with the mental health system and a lot of psychiatric abuse, which still continues today. It did then. Hospitals are not a safe space for many people when you're in serious mental distress. Putting somebody, a human being, down to the floor, putting a knee at the back of your neck and filling you up with antipsychotic drugs is absolutely dangerous. When you're in mental distress, and I can speak from my experience and I can't talk for everyone else because some people find hospital may be helpful. For me, it wasn't. I just need a safe space to feel safe when I'm in serious mental distress. I need calmness around me. And when I'm very distressed, I can't cope with noise and a lot of people around me. When you're cornered in a corner of a room by people and you're feeling frightened, you don't know what's going on, that is the absolute worst thing you can do to someone in mental distress. And what will they do when they're cornered? They lash out. I think we've suffered decades of underfunding in mental health, decades, from community care being scrapped to now care coordinators being abolished. To be honest with you, I'd like to see more mental health safe spaces, like safe spaces where you can get access to therapy that's tailored to meet your needs, because cognitive behavioral therapy and this one size fits all doesn't work. Cognitive behavioral therapy actually made me worse. I can't actually get therapy in the NHS today, and there are many people in mental distress today who are having to pay for low cost therapy, and that needs to seriously be addressed going forwards. Everyone should be able to access therapy when they need it. There is still a stigma for men to talk about mental health, And it's really important to stress that every 15 minutes in the UK, a man takes their own life. There's still huge taboo around mental health. And also, I think GPs, doctors should have compulsory mental health training. Only 10% of GPs have mental health training, and they can opt out of mental health training. When you're discharged back from the community mental health team to a GP and they're overseeing the serious medication you're taking, in my case, lithium, for example, they haven't got mental health training and they're dealing with serious psychiatric medication. They don't, to a psychiatrist, their attitude is numb you up and shut you up. And they don't like you challenging the system, the mental health professionals. And I think, to be honest with you, we know what works for us. We know what doesn't work for us. And to be honest, the person in mental distress and the family needs to be treated with respect, heard, and be incorporated in part of that treatment plan, not treated as a threat and by a doctor to say, oh, you know best. The doctors say, we know what's best and all the rest of it. And most of the time they don't.
Yeah, and I think it's that thing that, as you said, in terms with being people being prescribed medication, what it can sometimes can help, but as you said, with lack of access to additional mental health services for our side and actually having regular checkups and assessments, or not so much assessments, but regular therapy, or that is tailored to your needs and actually like a proactive response, not, as I said, just leaving a person medicated, but without any additional support or intervention, because that doesn't address the problems
No.
or the whatever the person is going through. And with that, then we can create a bit more fear even getting support, because sometimes if you've been gone to doctors before and you've been evaluating for mental health support, sometimes you don't feel the confidence, or you feel a certain anxiety then
I,
about having like a therapy sessions, and that's something that why you really want to see a quick access to services.
I think as well, many of us are impacted by uh, policy decisions and the political situation we're in. And many people get depressed about the political situation that we're in and the impact of policy. And when you go to therapy, you're not allowed to talk about politics or the impact of politics or the impact of cuts or anything. They don't want to talk about that. They impact on our lives. But also, when you have a mental health, when you have mental distress, your physical health isn't taken seriously because everything's either in your mind or you've made it up. Are you sure it's not depression when you're in serious pain? And I've had other disabilities as I've got older, and a lot of pain management they come out with, oh, think the pain away, think positive about your pain, look at your attitude towards pain. Well, when you're in pain and you can't sleep, there's no thinking positive about pain or thinking the pain away. That's complete and utter tosh, to be honest with you. And that doesn't work. And I've been under a pain management clinic where they think graded exercise therapy is the way to go ahead. And it's not, it's actually proved to be more harmful. And also, I'll have some CBT and think differently about your pain. It's utter rubbish. When you're in pain, you're in serious pain. And you need support to deal with it. But yeah, I've been in hospital when I've had relapse of my physical health issues. And as soon as they look and you've been in hospital with psychiatric issues and you've got a history of mental distress, the doctors do tend to treat you differently, and it makes you have a distrust of the medical profession. A lot of us have had issues with the medical profession where we just don't feel we can trust them. And to be honest with you, yeah, I've had my issues within the NHS, but I know I wouldn't be able to afford private healthcare
Yeah.
conditions. I wouldn't be able to afford it. And when you're looking at the political parties now, and we're speeding towards private healthcare system and private health insurance, you only have to look at America and the amount of Americans who are in serious debt, who've been bankrupted by medical bills, to know that we wouldn't be able to afford that system. But we have been grossly underfunded deliberately to pave the way for the NHS to be taken over by big private healthcare corporations. And you've got to remember, and this is what people need to remember today on the day of the election, that many MPs past and those standing for election today have got vested interest in private healthcare companies, and they want private healthcare companies involved in the NHS and for us to have private healthcare insurance because they make vast amounts of money out of it. But I wouldn't get private healthcare because I've got pre-existing medical conditions. I've been genetically tested and I've got family history, like several serious health conditions. So I wouldn't get cover. I can't get life cover. So I wouldn't be able to afford the premiums on private health insurance. How many disabled people wouldn't? They would not. And you would be left without treatment, or you just wouldn't be able to afford it.
Yeah, and go back on to that in a quick sec, but from what you were saying then about your previous issues with therapy, when you said sometimes can't always talk about political stuff, one of the issues with your pain, but I think it's certain things where it's with like physical health, where it can like swing between impacting on your mental health, but sometimes with like whether it's if you like having mental health with well, it's being impacted because you like poverty or like in relative poverty where you're struggling to pay bills or like as you described with your physical disabilities. Yes, certain like mental health therapies and talking sessions could be good, but I guess it's that thing that what could help you in terms of mental health then is also addressing that having treatment for your physical health and actually having your like kind of having your source of physical pain addressed, and it's something that I guess with in terms of mental health with those with chronic illnesses and chronic pain, that the like the impact of somebody's physical health and actually trying to focus on kind of putting pressure on the like those who are doing employed or who are specialising in the more physical side of the health treatment. So be able to be a bit more specified, speed it up a bit because the impact that's having on their own mental health, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. Do you know what would really, I'll tell you what, you asked many disabled people out there, and I will say this now. Do you know what would help my mental health?
Yeah.
Is if we could abolish the DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, we got rid of the disability assessments, and disabled people were treated with dignity and respect, and we weren't left in financial insecurity of never knowing when we're going to be reassessed and getting those letters through the doors, and you didn't have to fight for healthcare and you didn't have to face the abuse when you leave the house. That would improve my mental health considerably if all of that just stopped.
Yeah.
If we were treated as equal people in society with our access needs met, with our rights restored to us, with the Department of Work and Pensions scrapped, where these assessments stopped and we were treated with dignity and respect, that we were given financial provision that was enough to live on, and that our access needs were met with it, that we weren't in freezing cold homes, that we weren't going hungry, that we weren't dying. That would improve a great many people's mental health right now, right there. That the fact that you're having this work is a health outcome, for some people it may be, but it's not for everybody. This one size fits all approach doesn't work.
Yeah.
Basically, all of this with this government we've just had and what the next government will be, which will be for us more of the same, is just punitive cuts to protect the rich at the expense of us. And to be honest, we did not create this crisis in 2008. The bankers did. And we're paying for their crisis with ramping up of poverty and for many disabled people with their lives. It should be the bankers that are paying for this crisis, the austerity and everything else. But now you've got the uplifted off of bankers' bonuses. And you're seeing a rise of mental distress in schools because it's the push to achieve, obtain, get the right grades. And it's also, you're seeing it in the workplace where you're having to do 2 or 3 people's jobs, where you're having to get work 2 or 3 jobs or 4 jobs to pay the rent and try and put food on the table. And you know what else would improve people's mental health as well? You get rid of the gig economy, you get rid of 0 hours contracts, you get rid of fire and rehire, and where you had jobs that treated you properly, your workers' rights were properly protected, and you had decent pay and decent terms and conditions. That's what people want. Decent pay, so they can pay all their bills, pay the rent, have a little bit left over to have a treat here and there. They're not asking for the earth. But when you're seeing the richest globally increasing their wealth threefold, and we're getting poorer as a result of it, that is where inequality needs to be seriously addressed, and wealth distribution. But yeah, I think for mental health, for me, seeing the end of the DWP, the benefits assessments, just the eradication of poverty would help my mental distress, and I'm sure a great many people's going forwards as well. But that won't, under the next government, that won't happen, and we know that. And we've got more campaigning to do.
And as I said, with the terms of assessments, that thing is when you got, in terms of when you got a condition like you have, that is a lifelong condition, and if it's a lifelong disability, not something that is, if it's like a temporary injury where somebody is temporarily disabled over, like something that could be over like 6 months, or where they might be out of work for that time. But if it's something lifelong, it's something that you should have the assessments, shouldn't have those assessments or having to worry about all that stuff. Apart from maybe when you need a bit further, a bit more assistance with, if you have an extra cost, say if, in terms of getting support to get, if you move in and getting more accessible housing, or stuff like that. So it's that thing of, as you're saying, after removing,
I think
all those things on top of people's heads.
We've got a lot of disabled people frightened right now what the new government's next move will be over personal independence payment. You know, will the new government go ahead with this voucher system, or will they drop it? And it's important to stress that the consultation doesn't end until the 23rd of July on that. One of our first demands tomorrow has got to be saying to the new Secretary of State for the DWP, we want this consultation dropped. We want this threat of vouchers dropped. And we want the reforms to the work capability assessment dropped. But also, assessments should be brought back in-house, and we should be assessed by our own doctors, not by assessors with a few weeks of training. You haven't got a clue about what the nature of our disability and how it impacts on our day-to-day. And let's be clear on this. The assessment contracts are about disability denial. It's about cutting our support, putting us through a hell of a lot of distress. It's about stopping us claiming, full stop. They don't want us claiming anything. They don't want us claiming anything. But also, there's a massive gap in the employment market of where many employers will not put the access provision in place to meet a disabled employee's access needs for them to do that job. And also, they don't want to see, many employers just do not like the idea of having disabled people in their workplace, which is an absolute travesty. But like I reiterate, work is not great for all disabled people, and it can actually harm, and it's really important to stress that. So a one size fits all approach does not work for everybody, and it doesn't. It may be good for some people working, but it may not be good for everybody.
as you were saying earlier on, that you are concerned of further privatisation in the NHS and laws and changing as to what public money being spent on funding assessments, treatments, whatever, through the private sector. So in terms of when you mentioned that, who are the parties or the politicians and the things that you've been seeing from the political parties doing this election campaign give you that concern? And what are the things that you've been noticing from the different parties? Maybe if you've seen any positive things or negative things.
Conservatives are just they would just continue abusing our human rights and cutting our support and everything. They've made that pretty clear in their manifesto. Labour have been deathly quiet on what they are going to do on the welfare state going forwards, which is really alarming. It's what they're not saying that we should be concerned about. To be honest with you, I think for them to have a conversation on social care when they've had 4 years to talk about it is pretty crap, to be honest with you. And also for them to have a review on universal credit when they can see how much it's ramped up poverty, and that Labour are going to keep the 2-child benefit cap when it's one of the highest precursors of poverty with mothers with young children and families, I think is absolutely abhorrent. Labour should have committed to scrap the 2-child benefit cap, to be honest with you. The Lib Dems and the Greens have said some positive things in their manifestos, but Greens have talked about increasing benefits, and there's some positive stuff on social care from the Lib Dems, but we have a long memory with the Lib Dems and a coalition government. And also, I think it's really important to stress that Ed Davey, when interviewed by Sky News recently, flatly refused to acknowledge the Comden government of 2010 to 2015, of which he was a minister, refused to talk about austerity and their part to play in that. And I think that's really important to stress that the Lib Dems jumped into bed with the Conservatives, and if there was a coalition, they'd do the same again. What is deeply concerning is that all the parties are promoting assisted suicide. And while we have the social economic policies that we've got in privatisation to our services, the NHS, cuts to our financial support, this is a wrong move, because what we're seeing in Canada with medically assisted in death dying, you can wait over 10 years for social housing in Canada, but wait 90 days to be euthanized. And that is a really disastrous move. And I think I would urge people to watch Liz Carr's documentary, Better Off Dead, to explain why we're concerned about assisted dying and why we need to fight back against that right now. What's been really concerning through this election is the lack of mention of disabled people. It's like we haven't existed. There's scant information in the manifestos about disabled people. There was no British Sign Language interpretation at main speeches and manifesto pledges. Also, postal voting's been quite complicated. For if you've got a learning disability, it's like a Krypton factor challenge to sort your postal vote out in 2 different envelopes and what have you.
Yeah.
Getting hold of accessible formats for manifestos for disabled people with various access needs to read them has been nigh impossible. I think work needs to be done around that going forward. Will the governments do that? No, I doubt it. That is something we need to push on. And I think from the election, I think DPAC are looking now what we do from tomorrow onwards. And we ask, excuse me, we ask disabled people and our allies across the country to join with us on Thursday, the 18th of July, for our day of action called Disabled People Demand. We've got a list of demands that we're going to be campaigning around in the next Parliament, and that we're going to push the new government on and hold their feet to the fire on. And we're really disappointed. I know Lib Dems talked about the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Disabled People, and it wasn't in the Greens manifesto, but they talked about it. And Labour just said it's too expensive to implement. If we could get the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People enshrined in UK law, we'd have an awful lot more protections than we do at the moment. So we're asking disabled people and allies to join us on the 18th of July from 12 noon at Parliament Square. There's an action in Leeds and there's an action in Liverpool as well. But if you can't join in on the day physically, please just join us online, make a little video about what you want to see from the next government and why campaigning is really important. But also, I think we need to talk about the dangers of reform. What they're saying in their manifesto regarding disabled people is incredibly dangerous. They want to abolish the Equalities Act. They want face-to-face assessments for disabled people, push disabled people into work. It's very much Tories, but with just a different name.
Yeah.
But what's concerning is they want to remove the UK from the European Court of Human Rights. Whereas when our legal recourse through the UK comes to an end at the Supreme Court, we can actually take our court cases to the European Court of Human Rights. And also, the European Court of Human Rights actually oversees what the government are doing and what they're not doing. And if they try to the EHCR, that's like our freedom to assemble, our freedom to speak what we want. And I know these are under threat with the Tories, and Labour are pushing on that as well. But to abolish the Equalities Act and diversity, equality and inclusion in the workplace means disabled people will be further marginalised, discriminated against, and we will have no rights at all. It's incredibly regressive in the Reform manifesto. They're not reform at all. They're just abusive and nasty. And we just say to disabled people and our allies, we're going to have a hell of a fight going forwards to push reform back. Farage wants to become Prime Minister in 2029. You're only seeing globally, and you look at France, they're going for elections at the moment with Le Pen. There's a danger they could have a far-right government on Sunday. Trump in America, Italy, the political axis has shifted further to the right. So yeah, we've got to push back on reform going forwards and to fight for our human rights. I think that is massively important. Without human rights, we will not have any rights in the workplace: holiday pay, sick pay, freedom of expression. You'd see slavery, torture, God knows what else. It's terrible. It's really, we've got to push back on that. But what I'll end with saying to you here is the importance of campaigning. Must campaign going forwards tomorrow on the 5th of July. I know a lot of people are burnt out, 14 years of fighting the Tories, but DPAC are there to continue the fight, get involved with DPAC. But also what I would say is never give up the fight for your rights, because as long as one of us is talking, there's one of us still going, but we've got to push back tomorrow, no matter what the outcome of the election.
Yeah. Do you still have time for one or two brief questions? So it's fun to ask you, as you mentioned about it, certain political parties, how do you feel personally that how you're leaning to use your vote? What party or what even an independent candidate in terms of local election, who are you swinging towards?
In my constituency, I didn't have an independent candidate. To be honest with you, this is an incredibly Tory safe seat here, and I've never voted Tory in my life. I could never vote for reform and the racist rhetoric and everything they come out with. To be honest with you, I'm concerned about the Greens and them pledging support for NATO and arms and everything like that. I don't agree with war or anything like that. When this election was called, it absolutely filled me with dread and I was incredibly anxious. I still am today. There's people on social media celebrating. To be honest with you, as a disabled person right now, whoever gets in government is going to be more of the same for us. So we're going to be needed to campaign. It's been very difficult for me to vote because none of the parties, to be honest with you, there's manifesto pledges in the political parties' manifestos I don't agree with. And I used to be a Labour Party member. I was removed as a Labour Party member. And I could not vote for more austerity and more privatisation. I couldn't do that. And I couldn't vote Lib Dem because I remember the Condemned government and friends of mine died under a Condemned government, so I couldn't vote for that. And I couldn't vote for war. To be honest with you, I'm in this, I don't have Jeremy Corbyn or Fraser Shaheen or Pamela Fitzpatrick or Sam Gauls to vote for. I wish I had. I wish I was in Islington North right now, because I'd vote Jeremy Corbyn in a heartbeat. I don't have an independent to vote for. So if none of the political parties represent you, and you've got a really good independent standing in your area, then I wish I could vote for that. But for me, I've had a Labour candidate parachuted in who's caseworker for Rachel Reeves, a Green Party candidate who was a Labour defector. Who do I vote for?
So I guess you might not even vote, or you might spoil the ballot by the sounds of it.
I had a postal vote and none of the parties represented me. I wrestled with my conscience for a very long time. It's kept me awake nights worrying about it, because I know my great grandmother was part of the suffragette movement and she was force fed in prison, so I had that right to vote. She gave me the choice to vote. I know there are countries around the world who will not allow women to vote, Saudi Arabia still being one of them.
Yeah.
But
So
I cannot vote for more privatisation and austerity. And in my neck of the woods, neck of the woods, Greens and Lib Dems never get in.
So I assume that you are. So I guess you may even spoil a ballot, is it?
My postal vote went back. If it got back, there's been a huge issue around postal vote, many of them not turning up and everything. Mine was very late. I had the London mayor election a couple of months ago, and we got our postal vote in really good time for that. But whereas for the general election, I only got my postal vote last week, and with our post being the way it is, I'm not even sure if my postal vote got back.
So I assume you don't really feel like you can disclose who you voted for.
That's between me and my conscience and my ballot paper.
I'll leave that with you. And
as I have made it clear, I could not vote for Labour. I can't do it.
Another question is, like, when he was looking up about that DPAC protest, you also got like a set of demands. Can you briefly summarise or go through what are the demands that you're campaigning for and that you will be campaigning for within the next government?
We are campaigning. One of our demands is to get the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Disabled People enshrined in UK law. We want social care charges abolished. We want a publicly funded social care system that's publicly funded, not for profit, where it's co-designed by disabled people, delivered locally with a national independent living support service, and where carers and workers within the care sector are paid their value, where they have decent terms and conditions, are paid more than £15 an hour. We just want to see our rights restored to us, basically. We want to stop privatisation. We want a fully funded healthcare system. We want decent rights in the workplace. We want fully accessible transport. We shouldn't, in the 21st century, have a battle to get around because our public transport system is rubbish. From where I live here, it can take me over 3 hours to get into London by public transport. I live in Zone 6 of Greater London, and we have a public transport access level of 4. It's one of the worst in London. We don't have the tube where I am. We don't have the underground where we are. We don't have the tram. We have trains every half an hour. We've had endured bus cuts to frequency of service. It's quicker from Bristol to get into London than it is for me. And I live 15 miles outside of London. And if I want to go anywhere, say I've got an early campaign meeting or anything, a lot of the buses for me don't start until 7 o'clock in the morning. They stop at 11 o'clock at night. So getting across London after 11 o'clock in certain parts of London is not impossible. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I would say there's all the demands that DPAC are campaigning about, and there'll be more added to it because this conversation's got to keep going, are on the DPAC website, www.dpac.uk.net. And we just say, let's start the conversation on the kind of society we want, and let's have the conversation ongoing on more demands that we want from the next government. But also, this is going to be a protest to say that our fight for our rights will never stop, no matter who's in government tomorrow, who's in government 5 years from now. We'll always be fighting for our rights until we are fully included in society with our full inclusive rights. The fight for that will never stop, even after I'm gone. But also, I'll end with this. I'm not going to be around forever, and the activists involved with DPAC are not going to be involved around forever. And in the trade union movement, we need to see a lot more younger people joining the trade union movement. But we also need to see younger activists coming through with other ideas and a way to take the campaigns forward, so that we pass the baton over to them. Because like I say, we're not going to be around forever. And it's really important, and I want to end with this, that today as we go to the ballot box, we remember every disabled person no longer with us, who's died as a result of austerity, who've had their rights taken from them, who died in the pandemic due to horrendous governmental decisions, we've had our human rights abused. I think we need to take a moment to reflect the tragic human cost of 14 years of cuts, and also to know that we're going to have to fight to put a stop to that. But I think it's really important that we need to hold to account ministers past and present for every single death that the disabled movement has endured. And I just think we need to take a couple of minutes today to remember the disabled people we've lost, the families who are grieving, and the families who are still fighting for justice for those deaths. And that fight will never stop. And we need to hold the new government's feet to the fire. And we must demand an independent benefit deaths inquiry. And those responsible, ministers past and present, employment ministers, Secretary of States for the D, assessors, senior civil servants are held to account for those deaths, and we will not rest until we get justice for that.
Like, definitely the last question. What are do you have? Sorry, no, yeah, so I'll give you a sec. But I know this has been quite a emotional interview for you, but to try to end on a note, is there anything on it? Is there anything you're hopeful or hopeful for in the future, or like what maybe the DPAC can achieve? What are the things that maybe that can help
I,
the
I,
disability movement keep on going? And
I think we need to celebrate our wins. I mean, we trashed Atos's reputation with the work capability assessment. We've made them a poison chalice. We need to remember all the wins that we've had of accessible transport, the extra funding for the Elizabeth line, which we helped campaign around. It's important that when we force the government on U-turns and they don't go ahead with a policy, that's a win. No matter how small it is, it's a win. So that is where the importance of campaigning is going forwards. I hope in the future one day that they look back at this time as a dark time in our history, and one day the world resets itself and it's a more equal world for everybody, and wealth is distributed, and where disabled people are treated with dignity, respect, kindness, and fully included in society. I would love to see disabled people fully included in society and just living our lives the way we want to, not the way the government dictate to us, but the way we want to. And we cling to that hope and that vision that is what we'd like to see. But like I say, we've got to continue campaigning for that. It won't be handed to us. We've got to keep campaigning for that.
thank you very much for coming on and chatting to me. You've been
Pleasure.
excellent. Yeah, you've been an excellent guest, and I really appreciate it because this has been, I know, something that is so important to you to talk about, discuss and have the platform for, and as you said, you haven't been able to see these conversations throughout the election, and it's something that definitely is forgotten about. So we do definitely need to have these conversations, and I'm glad you've had this with me. So thanks again,
You're
and
welcome.
have a hope you can have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, busy campaigning. We've got a campaign on the 18th that we're working around, and obviously there's election stuff. And also to
Yeah,
the disabled people out there, if you're going to vote, and we're only at lunchtime, you can take your disabled blue badge as proof of ID, because it's important to remember that you've got voter ID when you go to vote
yeah,
today. You can take, if your passport is out of date, you can take that with you. If you've got a bus pass, freedom pass, a 60s Oyster card, you can take that as ID as well. So do take your disabled blue badge if you've got one to vote, but vote with your conscience. What kind of government do you want to see? But like I say, even if we get the Tories out of government tomorrow, we will still continue to campaign to make sure that those ministers who've made the decisions of the last 14 years are held to account. And it's also important to stress that when the MPs are not, they lose their seats and everything, they're not protected from immunity because they work their MP. So then we can press for prosecution against ministers and they lose their seat. I really do hope we see some really big ministers lose their seats tonight.
yeah,
I think there'll be some cheering in a lot of places if we see like Mel Stride lose his seat. I'd love to see Ian Duncan Smith lose his seat in Chingford and Woodford Green, and I think that'll be poetic justice. We have to see what happens in the early hours. But
yeah,
thanks very much for having me on,
yeah,
and enjoy the rest of your day. And I'm going to be busy helping my DPAC friends and everything
yeah.
fight
Great,
campaigning.
yeah, great stuff, and best of luck with the campaigning.
Thank you. Take
You're
care.
welcome. Yeah, have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Yeah, take care. Bye.